What is the death toll of Kakariko Village in Ocarina of Time? The physical, countable death toll. Presumably, a village at the foot of a, quote, death mountain surely has a few bodies laying around. A kill count that would even make the Dark Lord Ganondorf blush. So, just how much death is there? Well, today, we're going to be counting just that. Bodies. Back in 2019, I actually started this project and abandoned it due to insanity reasons. But here we are, 7 years later, after my soul has been released from Magic Blade Purgatory to pick up the count. We're going to go bone by bone, body by body, to see how many remains we can find. Our goal is to come up with a total death toll, to show that maybe the Sheikah were worse than old Ganondorf. So how many bodies do you think are here? 50? 100? 1,000? Hold my milk, brother, because this is going to be a long one. So let me set the stage while you think about how many corpses are within Kakariko Village's area, including its dungeons. In The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Kakariko Village is a quaint settlement that resides in northeastern Hyrule. Once upon a time, this was the place that the Sheikah tribe called home. Now it exists as a home for all Hylians. This town is the hub and gateway for numerous quests and other locations in the game, such as Death Mountain, that lies ominously on the horizon. Beneath Kakariko Village is the horrifying area known as Bottom of the Well, which is festering with the living dead and the remains of those who have passed on. This is terrifying in its own right, before we even consider the fact that this might be the place where the townsfolk draw their drinking water from. Yikes. And then we have the graveyard, all its contents, and the Shadow Temple. The Shadow Temple's history is grim, embodying Hyrule's bloody history of greed and hatred, according to texts we see in the game. The entry in the Legend of Zelda Encyclopedia from Dark Horse only solidifies that further. The Shadow Temple, located in the Kakariko Village graveyard. It is a place where the Sheikah, entrusted with the lives of Hyrule's royal family, have historically taken enemies of the royal family to be interrogated or worse. Because it stands as a symbol of Hyrule's dark history, it is taboo for the royal family to speak of this temple and its horrific purpose. How lovely. Anyway, let's start our count. So our first location is going to be the graveyard. If you're looking for bones, why wouldn't you start here? I think our first big step should be Dompe's grave. But before we move the old groundskeeper's gravestone, let's go ahead and count the marked graves we have here, and check out the hidden chambers beneath, such as the fairy fountain. Looking around the graveyard, we see that there are in fact 20 graves present here. Honestly, for a town that's existed for such a long time, there are surprisingly few stones. I wonder where the rest of the bodies are. We're only going to count 17 of these stones as individual graves, assuming there is a body under each, as the 3 movable stones have crypts beneath with additional bodies. The grave closest to the royal tomb has a small room beneath, with Hylian script carved into the walls. There are 3 skulls present down here, as well as a re-dead. I considered whether or not we would be counting re-deads due to an excerpt from Smash Bros. Describing them as clay monsters, but in Majora's Mask, we can see someone turning into a Gibdo, and burning away bandages of Gibdos reveals a re-dead. We're gonna go ahead and tally them up and ignore Smash Bros. Attempt to make them less terrifying. With that in mind, this crypt has a total of 4 bodies within it. So that's 21 bodies so far if we include those 17 graves. There is one other smaller grave that will need to move before we disturb Dompe's rest, the one hiding the fairy fountain. I do find it fairly strange that there is a fountain here amongst the bones. It's a bit humorous, dare I add. Seriously though, the polarizing nature of this location is strange. In one room we have death, and in the other, a means to cheat it. This kind of makes it feel like these poor souls fell just short of saving themselves. But I digress. We have 2 bodies here, which brings us up to 23. Next, we'll plunge into Dompe's grave. It is immediately apparent that Dompe must have either had a fat stack of rupees hidden away to pay for the construction of this place, or he spent the years of linked slumber digging out his own tomb. I suppose it's also possible he simply stumbled upon the ruins while digging, given the scribed columns. Equally strange is that it connects to the windmill. Throughout the course of these tunnels, we come across 8 different bodies. There are 10 locations that contain bones, but some of those bones could belong to the same body. However, interestingly, some of them feature prominent horns. Clearly not human, perhaps evidence of the Sheikah lore in these parts being true. But besides the bones, we can also find 4 different re-deads in here, which would probably mean Dompe found this place, unless he's the one making zombies. Anyway, we'll add 12 to our count. We aren't counting Dompe's ghost because he could be one of the skeletons here, which we already counted. Our final stop in the graveyard for now is the royal family's tomb. There's 10 assorted bodies within the entryway of this place. Like dang, what happened here? These bodies were obliterated and their bones scattered. Those Redeads be doing work. This location may shed more light on the Redead, and possibly make the implication that they're not necessarily servants of darkness. The full human skeleton in the first room provides the statement that those who break into the royal tomb will be obstructed by the lurkers in the dark. That would seem to imply that they're actually here protecting the tomb, like Haniwa figurines from Japanese history. Pardon my Japanglish. Those are clay dolls that are meant to guard the tombs they are located in. Yeah, we're still counting them as bodies, but it was worth mentioning. As we come into the second room within the royal family's tomb, we see 3 Redead lurking around the green, poisonous pools. There's also bones scattered around this room with a strange skull that would all amount to one body, at least from what I can tell. Finally, the last chamber contains the remains of 3 poor souls. Did the Redeads get them? For now, that brings our total body count in the graveyard to 48. Now, we're not counting Pose because they could be from a body. There is, however, one more small stop we'll need to make before our next major destination, Kakariko Village, and the grotto in the center of town. If we leap down into the hole, we'll find 2 Redeads down here. Now that we counted those 2 fellows, I believe it's time for us to investigate what might be the creepiest place in Ocarina of Time, the bottom of the well. Time to go back in time. Fortunately, Link just needs the Master Sword, and not 1.21 gigawatts of electricity for the drip. I'd like to reiterate that the very idea of bottom of the well is disgusting. Do the people of Kakariko Village drink from and bathe in this water full of dead things? Hopefully, they use the river outside of town. If they were using the well, I wouldn't bat an eye if I was told all the corpses in the Shadow Temple were simply villagers who died from disease. With that terrible thought put aside, it's time to tally up some skulls in this nightmare well. There is 1 skeleton leaning against the wall here in the entry corridor to start us off. We can find 1 more skeleton against a different wall if we hang a left after the entrance. Further into the dungeon, we can find a crypt with what seems to be 6 sarcophaguses. We aren't counting those because we eventually open them and most are empty other than bats and collectibles. But this room does give us 2 Gibdos total. Moving on, this central cavern on the bottom floor has a Redead creeping in the shadows. The prime feature here is this sickly pool of glowing green liquid with the hands of the dead reaching forth, grasping at whatever they can find. We'll count those. There are 8 pairs of hands here, so 8 bodies. We'll also count these 2 torches seemingly fashioned out of skulls. We can find 1 last Redead around the bend down here near a treasure chest. Up above, there's a giant bubble, which is a skull, so maybe that once belonged to someone too. This brings us to 16 bodies for a total of 70 so far. Now, there's a couple of things to talk about here. 1, you've probably noticed that there are some bone creations that need counting. We'll get to those very soon and come back to the well, because it gets complicated. And 2, we aren't counting Skulltulas because the skull grows on the spider. It isn't a spider residing in the skull, like a hermit crab situation. The cursed family sheds some light on this because we can see the man's head and the Skulltula's head at the same time, as he is mid-transformation. He's transforming into the creature that already has the skull abdomen. We are, however, counting skull torches, because it's impossible to tell whether it's fashioned from a real skull, a dead spider abdomen, or just made to look like a skull. Don't fret about that too much, because our numbers are going to increase pretty rapidly from here, so sit tight. Onward to the Shadow Temple, and onward to where I left off a long time ago. This room we're currently entering, which is somewhat of a hub for the early temple, has 5 skull posts, each seemingly built out of 2 skulls each. We're just getting started here, but this will bring our count up to 80. We're going to proceed to the rooms off to the left first, before moving deeper into the temple. The fake walls add a level of eerie atmosphere to the place as we move through the corridor. Now up ahead here, we have a number of skull reliefs on each wall section, which I believe we should include in our count, as there's no way of knowing if they're purely an artificial adornment carved out of stone, or if the Sheikah repurposed someone's remains for their own gothic taste and decoration. However, some of these are mere illusions that aren't really there, 3 to be exact. So in those instances, we won't be counting them. As we enter the next room, we see that the outer walls have 5 sections each, and the inner walls have 2 each. 3 of these are false, including the one we just passed through. This would add 25 skulls to our current count, bringing us to 105. Now we can, start counting the skulls on the ceiling and floor. Wow, there's a lot. And it was at this point, years and years ago, that I ended up putting a pause on my count. At that time, I was making weekly videos, and the scope of this video was becoming unfeasible to produce in a week. But I am not the man I was yesterday. I've learned a thing or two since then, I think. So we're going to reset our count to 70 just for a moment as we rewind time. And then I'll quickly add back these 35 kills in a bit. So we have skull piles and rooms made of skulls in both the Shadow Temple and bottom of the well. And this is a repeating skull texture that is wrapped around 3D models. So back then I was going to unwrap these models and count these flattened, which is a nightmare. An easier method, in my opinion, is to steal the skull texture, count the skulls within, and then replace it with something that can be counted easily in 3D space. We then multiply by the skulls in the texture. Before doing that, make a ballpark guess yourself for how many skulls we're gonna find. Hold that number in your mind. There's a few rooms made of these suckers, so don't be bashful. I'm going to guess 9,000 skulls. A bit ambitious, but now you know why I shelved this video for 7 years. So we steal the wall texture from the game and then count how many skulls are in it. So let's boot up some imaging software and pull our texture in, shall we? Alright, so that's much more readable. This particular texture is 32 by 32. Though small, you can see how much less stretched and muddy it is here in its original form. I tiled the file in order to better see the repeating skulls that are cut off at the edges, such as these skull pieces at the top and bottom of the texture. With that in mind, I think we can safely count the number of skulls on the texture. 1, 2, 3. I'm seeing 9 skulls on each texture instance for sure, but there's some space between the clearer skulls where we can see details that appear to be eye sockets and the like. There's a case to be made for there to be enough space here for up to 12 skulls. So I think that's the number we are going to go with. From here, we're going to want to figure out just how many times the texture repeats in each and every room within the game. I believe the best approach for this wouldn't be too far removed from what a texture artist would do to examine a model's paintable surface before texturing it, which is necessary for making the textures blend appropriately over the model's seams. 3D objects use a set of coordinates called UVs to map all this out. Models can also have stretching or distortion occurring that wouldn't be immediately apparent without investigating first, which is something we're going to be seeing here with these low-resolution textures. Imagine wrapping presents, as working with textures is pretty similar. One of the best ways to check for distortion is by applying a checkerboard texture to the object to see if it wraps around the model appropriately. Now, we don't necessarily need to be doing all of that here, so a simple outline box with some sort of marker inside will do the job for us just fine. Something like this will be perfect. Now back to the Shadow Temple to see how this looks. Sorry, Link, I'm sure things are going to look a little weird here now. Although, let's be honest, they always did. As you can see, the floor and ceiling had not been converted to our new texture in order for us to make a more accurate count. It seems that we may need to do some rough measurements as well to approximate our numbers due to how the textures have been applied to the ceiling, floor, and walls here. Back to the imaging software we go. So, as we could see, the textures on the wall were not fully displayed, and we'll need to take the partial portions of the texture on the floors and ceiling as well. Also, there are some other structures built here, such as these pillars against the wall. I believe we'll be going forward on the assumption that there are no skulls behind them, as they are pressed firmly into the wall. Honestly, thinking about it, having landed on 12 as a number of potential skulls on any given texture instance is going to be super helpful, since it divides nicely by half, by thirds, and by fourths. Lots of numbers, Link. Now it's time to count. So now that we have this working in the Shadow Temple, let's quickly retrace our steps to the bottom of the well to count what we missed before having this method to help us. I suppose we'll go ahead and cut our teeth on the entrance, as there are a few nasty looking piles of death as we came in. You can see how our texture has now applied over the top of these piles and has given us an idea of the proportions, which we will use to estimate the amount of skulls. As you can see in the imaging software, I've assigned each iteration of the texture a colored marker. Blue will be for a full square, red will represent 3/4, yellow for 2/3, white for half, green for thirds, teal for fourths, and purple will represent a fraction only large enough for one skull. With using 12 as our estimate for a full swatch, it will break down into these fractions easily with whole numbers. As you can see, these piles have an assortment of different sizes marked. The total for this entryway amounts to 137 skulls. The grand total so far, without the Shadow Temple pre-count, is 207 bodies. That one room multiplied the previous total by almost 3 by itself. Now, piles of skulls, of course, have depth to them, but we're going to shelve that for now. Moving along, we break down each and every skull instance in the same manner. There is this larger room by the Triforce symbol that has skulls for the floor and ceiling, with skull reliefs on the walls. This one adds up to 739 bodies. There's also these 2 alcoves that are in the hallways with similar setups. There's 3 piles of skulls around this place too. However, the big numbers are going to come from this place. Rooms where the very walls and floors themselves are fashioned with the bones of the deceased. This one room here where you would fight Dead Hand for the compass, for instance, after taking the time to tally up each and every part of it, adds 2,937 corpses to our count. After examining every room, we can see that the well contains 4,014 bodies on top of the individual bodies we counted earlier, which brings our grand kill count from the graveyard, royal family tomb, and bottom of the well up to 4,221. Back to the Shadow Temple we go. Let's retally the 10 skulls for these torches real quick and head over here. Looking at the sections of the wall in front of us, they all seem to be identical as far as texture distribution. The upper section and lower section are divided into portions of a third, and these two pieces are about a fourth each. Taking our proportions, the top section and bottom section would both have 8 skulls each, for a total of 16. Earlier, we established that there are 25 sections of the wall in this room after subtracting the illusions, plus the 25 skull reliefs in the center of each section. So that would be 525 skulls. Now for the floor and ceiling, which for this room happens to be exactly the same as the other, the camera angle here does tend to make this room look more rectangular than square, and there is a bit of texture stretching going on. Applying our method here, we see that there are quite a few texture squares, but we'll need to remove that central area from the equation since it's walled off. You could argue that we should count this, as if Link was in here, he could stand, but it's not normally supposed to be accessed and is out of bounds, so is it canon? Without it, this room comes in at 1,647 skulls, including the 525 from before. The room adjacent to it here is nearly identical. The only difference is that there's one less fake wall than this one. Because of this, this room clocks in at 1,664 skulls. Our current grand total, 7,542 bodies. Room 3 is a bit smaller than the last two, but between the bones in the walls and the lonely re-dead within, it weighs in at 748 corpses. The Shadow Temple is relatively large compared to the other areas we've explored up to this point. If we just pop out of bounds for a moment here, we can see the rooms we've counted so far over here. We're going to be proceeding down these corridors here now to count these rooms next, after one more peek in here. This fourth room is another heavy hitter. This room is home to a Dead Hand, which won't be counted as it's uncertain what it actually is. As we count this one up, we come to a total of 2,888. Imagine being the builder and needing to secure the supplies before building. Yikes! The crazy part is, this is still going to be an estimate, because it's just surface level. We can't measure depth with walls, especially if they face outward to the void. These rooms remind me of real-world places, such as the Skull Chapel in Poland and the catacombs under Paris, France. Skulls in some places like this are piled deep, not just at a single layer. Pretty mind-blowing. And we're not even done yet. What's our current count sitting at anyway? Oh right, a casual 11,178 bodies. There's no way the Sheikah were just interrogating this many foes. Clearly, the bloodstains on the floors are indicative of Hyrule's bloody history of greed and hatred that the temple itself whispered to us earlier on. Just look at this room here. Stains under torture equipment. Now it just has this foreboding pile of bodies laying in the corner, which, when counted, would net us 41 corpses. It's not just purely the deceased that we're investigating here. We've already looked at a few Redead and Gibdos, but the Shadow Temple also has a few other skeletal foes that lurk the grounds. For instance, the single Stalfos that waits for us just after the fiery bubble in this large room. Like earlier on in this temple, and in bottom of the well, there are skull torches as well, like in this room. Recognizable due to the invisible walls we must traverse with the terrifying floor masters crawling in wait. It has 4 more skull torches built into the walls, and adjacent room has something interesting inside, along with another 4 of these torches. These 3 gargantuan, double-faced, fiery skull cauldrons that spin around. Now, I'm not sure how the Sheikah would have dragged anything this large down here, or truly what these skulls might have belonged to in life, as they're quite human-like, but with sharpened teeth, assuming they are real. The only enemy I can think of that approaches this size would be like a mutant Hinox, but they're Cyclops and aren't present in Ocarina of Time. Gorons can get kinda big though. We're bebopping around a bit here, I know, but we're going to finish rounding up these smaller spots real quick before heading back to the larger rooms. Just ahead here, we have this room with invisible spikes all around and 2 Redead. Then here, 1 giant cauldron and 4 more of our familiar skull torches right next door. Skulls and bodies everywhere. Here, we fight 2 more Stalfos during the boat ride section of this dungeon. They drop in on us from above for a surprise. Speaking of surprises, something happened in this room that I wasn't expecting. It's not part of the count per se, but as you can see here, the skull texture was present in areas you might not initially realize while playing the game. Here, for instance, it seems to be enlarged and combined with the ground's texture in sort of an overlay for additional noise. Neat! Moving on, another shock that probably occurred for many of us in our first playthrough was this room here. The classic crushing spike wall trap that hides the boss key, and 2 Redead. Counting these instances, our total body count is sitting at 11,247. These next 2 rooms share some similarities with the chamber we looked at back at the beginning of our Shadow Temple delve, in that it's exactly the same, except that it contains 2 Gibdo within instead of 1 Redead. This area houses 749 bodies, while this room contains 580 bodies between the Redead, pile, walls, floors, and ceiling. The reason this room differs from the earlier room of the same relative shape is simply due to the picture in this wall, and the different way the texture flows on it. Different sizes and orientation can lead to different counts, which is why this next room, with its size and textures, will clock in at 2,256 remains. The Gibdo seems rather lonely in this large room. Speaking of lonely, there is one single exploding wall right here, constructed from roughly 65 skulls. Last, but certainly not least, is the chamber leading in to fight Bongo Bongo and the arena itself. This room is barely illuminated, and as you can see, there's a lot of this wall obscured by shadow, so we can't really give it all a count. But between it and the tunnel below, we have 978 skulls in our presence. If we drop down to Bongo Bongo's Bongo, which is funny to say, we'll see one last set of skulls. 4 giants, holding up the boss's instrument of choice. Like the cauldrons earlier, who or what these belong to is a mystery. So, our death toll is, drumroll please, 15,875 corpses. Rated E for everyone. Also remember, this is just a guess, based on a single layer that we can see on the surface. There could be more or less at the surface level, simply depending on how many skulls you interpret in the 32x32 texture file. The reality is that some of these things we are counting are actual piles, and in all likelihood, the walls, floors, and ceilings were more than 1 layer deep, similar to real-world inspirations. So you could even double that number if you think there are skulls behind that first set of skulls. Well, that was grim. Hope you learned something though. Cheers!